It's the autumn of 1999. In the space of 2 weeks, bombs tear through apartment blocks in 3 Russian cities while people sleep. Around 300 are dead. The country is terrified, and it wants someone to blame.
Мы будем преследовать террористов везде. В аэропорту, значит, вы уж меня извините, в туалете поймаем, и в сортире их замочим, в конце концов. Все, вопрос закрыт окончательно.
In front of the cameras stands a man almost nobody has heard of a month earlier. A grey former spy named Vladimir Putin, made prime minister in August by a fading Boris Yeltsin. He promises to hunt the killers down without mercy. Then he sends the army back to Chechnya, the small mountain republic that had humiliated that same army 3 years before. 18 months later, Putin runs the country. He has run it ever since. This is the story of the war that put him there, the Second Chechen War. To understand the Second War, you have to know how the first one ended. If you've seen the last video, you know how this starts. Chechnya declared independence, Russia invaded in 1994 and got beaten, humiliated by a far smaller Chechen force. In 1996, Yeltsin signs a peace deal, pulled his troops out, and left Chechnya's legal status for later. What it left behind was a republic independent in practice, but broken in fact. By 1997, it had a new president, Aslan Maskhadov, a former Soviet officer, a moderate, a man who wanted to negotiate. The trouble was that the peace he inherited was barely a peace at all. Maskhadov survives assassination attempt after assassination attempt, often blamed on his rival, the warlord Shamil Basayev. Kidnapping and crime spill across the borders. Russian officials are murdered inside Chechnya, and the chaos is leaking into neighboring Dagestan, another Muslim republic of the Russian Federation. The fight is changing shape too. Early on, it had been a nationalist cause, not a religious one. But as the years of war grind on, religion fills the vacuum, fed by money and foreign fighters from the wider Muslim world. That foreign contingent is always tiny, probably never more than 200 to 300 men, though Moscow will later inflate it into a foreign terror army. Basayev rides that wave to become Chechnya's leading hardline Islamist. In early 1999, Maskhadov, afraid of being outflanked by radicals, announces Chechnya will move to Sharia law, straining his relationship with Moscow even further. If you are enjoying the video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. I also have a Patreon and channel membership you can subscribe to if you want to support me even more. Now back to the video. In August 1999, Basayev and a Saudi militant known as Ibn al-Khattab led a force across the border into Dagestan to help local Islamists break the republic away from Russia and join it to Chechnya. Basayev is already a name Russians fear, the man behind the 1995 Budyonovsk hospital siege that helped force the end of the First War. Dagestani forces, backed by the Russian military, beat the fighters off by the end of September. But the scale of the raid seems to confirm Moscow's worst fear. An independent Chechnya is a security threat. Here the official story and the evidence part ways, and it's worth slowing down. The Russian version is clean. Chechens attacked Dagestan. Terrorists bombed Russian cities, and a reluctant Russia was forced to respond. The problem is the invasion looks like it was already decided. Through the spring of 1999, Russia had been moving armored units towards the Chechen border. By late July, more than a week before the Dagestan raids, Russian troops destroyed a Chechen border post and pushed several kilometers in, taking a bridgehead across the Terek River. The Chechen historian Abbas Usmayev reads it the same way. Maskhadov publicly condemned the raid on Dagestan against everything Russian propaganda claimed. And Usmayev argues the evidence shows Russia's security services knew the incursion was coming and let it happen because a pretext suited the Kremlin.
Снова прогремел взрыв. Снова жертвы.
In September 1999, bombs destroy apartment blocks in Buynaksk, Moscow and Volgodonsk, killing around 300 people. Moscow blames Chechen terrorists. The Chechen government and Basayev both deny it. No one is ever brought to trial and no proof is made public. That silence feeds a dark suspicion that Russia's own security services planted the bombs to manufacture a reason for war. The suspicion catches fire on September 22nd. Residents in the city of Ryazan catch men linked to the FSB, Russia's internal security service, apparently planting a bomb in an apartment basement. The FSB said it was a training exercise and the explosive was sugar. The local police don't believe it. To this day, the official Russian version pins the bombing on Islamist militants under al-Khattab, with a businessman named Achemez Gochiyayev as organizer, convicted in absentia and still at large. Critics point to Ryazan instead and to the fact that the Duma repeatedly voted down an independent inquiry, leaving the case unresolved. Several people who investigated the false flag theory later died, most notably the ex-FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko, poisoned in London in 2006. The honest answer is that this has never been settled. Whatever the truth, the bombings do their work. As Usmayev puts it, Dagestan hadn't rallied Russians behind a war, but the bombing set off an explosion of anti-Chechen hysteria. Within a month, Putin orders a full invasion. In August 1999, Vladimir Putin is almost nobody. A career security official, Yeltsin, named Prime Minister on the 9th, and in the same breath calls his chosen successor. Most Russians have barely heard the name. The war changes that overnight. On September 23rd comes his famous vow to wipe out the terrorists even in the outhouse. And the grey bureaucrat becomes the strongman the country thinks it wants. The payoff is fast. The pro-Putin unity bloc sweeps the December 1999 Duma elections on the back of the war's early wins. Yeltsin resigns on New Year's Eve and hands Putin the acting presidency. In March 2000, Putin wins the election outright. Unlike the first war, this one is popular and it carries its architect straight to the Kremlin. In September 1999, Russia begins bombing targets across Chechnya, then sends ground forces in. At first, Moscow says it only wants the land north of the Terek River. Then the troops keep going, and by November they are shelling Grozny again. This time the Russians fight smarter and uglier. Burned by the slaughter of the First War, they mostly stay outside the city and destroy it from a distance. It is wildly one-sided. By December 1999, Russia has massed roughly 100,000 troops, around 1,650 tanks and armored vehicles, and 480 rocket artillery systems, against a few thousand Chechen fighters. The bombardment empties the republic. By October, some 146,000 refugees have fled into tiny Ingushetia alone, with Russia doing little to help them. The West condemns the brutality, Russia ignores it, and after the September 11th attacks 2 years later, recasts the whole war as its front in the global war on terror, buying itself a lot of Western silence. The assault on Grozny begins on December 26, 1999, with up to 20,000 troops. Russia takes heavy losses, isolated units ambushed in the rubble, and the fighting drags into the new year. But this time the Russians do what they'd failed to do in 1994. They completely encircle the city and cut off the defenders. Starved of food and ammunition, the Chechens face a brutal choice: break out or surrender. The cost is staggering. Across both wars, estimates of civilian dead run from 40,000 to as high as 200,000. And Grozny is the worst of it. By 2003, the United Nations would call it the most destroyed city on Earth. On the night of January 31st, 2000, the main Chechen force tries to break out to the west. Russian generals later called it a deliberate trap that wiped out the rebels. In reality, most of the fighters escaped through a corridor of villages, hammered the whole way by air and artillery strikes that kill many civilians too. The last big battle comes at the village of Komsomolskoye, which the rebels seize and try to hold until March 20th. The village is leveled. After that, the survivors melt into the southern mountains. The conventional war is over, the insurgency is just starting. Having flattened Chechnya, Moscow needs a local to run it. The strategy is old: divide and rule. In June 2000, Putin appoints a Chechen cleric, Akhmad Kadyrov, to head the republic. A 2003 referendum rubber stamps a new constitution, and that October Kadyrov is elected president with an official 81%. A vote monitors flag as manipulated. The leaders are hunted down one by one. Kadyrov is killed by a bomb at a Victory Day parade in Grozny in May 2004. Power passes to his son, Ramzan Kadyrov, who still runs Chechnya today as a personal fiefdom loyal to Putin. Maskhadov is killed by Russian forces in March 2005, Basayev in July 2006. As the insurgency loses ground, it turns to spectacular terror, and a striking number of the attackers are women. In October 2002, militants seize the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow. The rescue ends with 130 hostages dead, only 5 killed by the militants, the rest by the gas Russian forces pump into the building. In September 2004, fighters take a school in Beslan. The 3-day siege ends in carnage, 330 hostages killed, 186 of them children. The horror hands Putin his justification for a sweeping centralization of power, including scrapping direct elections for regional governors. The Second Chechen War officially ended in April 2009, when Russia declared its counter-terrorism operation over. The violence didn't stop, but it shrank and it spread. The very success of ruling through proxies pushed the fight outward, beyond Chechnya into the wider North Caucasus region, first as the Caucasus Emirate, later a branch of the Islamic State. Chechnya went from importing jihadists into exporting them. The human cost is hard to take in. By the mid-2000s, Chechnya's population had fallen to around 600,000, roughly half of what it had been when the conflict began. Russian losses were heavy too. The committees of soldiers' mothers estimate some 25,000 troops killed across both wars, far above the official count. So, who won? On paper, Russia. It kept Chechnya inside the Federation, installed a loyal strongman, and rebuilt Grozny into a showcase. But the bill came due somewhere else. The war that restored Russia's grip on Chechnya remade Russia itself. It made Putin. It normalized the flattening of cities, the silence of journalists, and the managed democracy that hollowed out elections from the regions up. Across the mountains to the south sat Georgia. In August 2008, Russia would send its army across that border for real. That war is where we're going next. Thanks for watching this video. This is the second in a 3-part documentary about Russia's wars. You can check out the first part by clicking here. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.